Good morning. Welcome back to the Southern Bible Thumper channel. For this upload, we will be reading Judges chapter 7. Then Jerubbaal, who is Gideon, and all the people that were with him rose up early and pitched beside the well of Herod, so that the host of the Midianites were on the north side of them, by the hill of Moreh in the valley. And the Lord said unto Gideon, The people that are with thee are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands, lest Israel vaunt themselves against me, saying, Mine own hand hath saved me. Now therefore go to, proclaim in the ears of the people, saying, Whosoever is fearful and afraid, let him return and depart early from Mount Gilead. And there returned of the people 20,000, and there remained 10,000. And the Lord said unto Gideon, The people are yet too many. Bring them down unto the water, and I will try them for thee there. And it shall be that of whom I say unto thee, This shall go with thee, the same shall go with thee. And of whomsoever I say unto thee, This shall not go with thee, the same shall not go. So he brought down the people unto the water. And the Lord said unto Gideon, Every one that lappeth of the water with his tongue as a dog lappeth, him shalt thou set by himself. Likewise, every one that boweth down upon his knees to drink. And the number of them that lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, were 300 men. But all the rest of the people bowed down upon their knees to drink water. And the Lord said unto Gideon, By the 300 men that lapped I will save you, and deliver the Midianites into thine hand, and let all the other people go every man unto his place. So the people took victuals in their hand, and their trumpets, and he sent all the rest of Israel, every man unto his tent, and retained those 300 men, and the host of Midian was beneath him in the valley. And it came to pass the same night that the Lord said unto him, Arise, get thee down unto the host, for I have delivered it unto thine hand. But if thou fear to go down, go thou with Purah thy servant down to the host. And thou shalt hear what they say, and afterward shall thine hands be strengthened to go down unto the host. Then went he down with Purah his servant unto the outside of the armed men that were in the host. And the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the children of the east lay along in the valley like grasshoppers for multitude, and their camels were without number, as the sand by the seaside for multitude. And when Gideon was come, behold, there was a man that told a dream unto his fellow, and said, Behold, I dreamed a dream, and lo, a cake of barley bread tumbled into the host of Midian, and came unto a tent, and smote it, that it fell, and overturned it, that the tent lay along. And this fellow answered and said, This is nothing else save the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. For into his hand hath God delivered Midian and all the host. And it was so, when Gideon heard the telling of the dream and the interpretation thereof, that he worshipped, and returned into the host of Israel, and said, Arise, for the Lord hath delivered into your hand the host of Midian. And he divided the 300 men into 3 companies, and he put a trumpet in every man's hand, with empty pitchers and lamps within the pitchers. And he said unto them, Look on me, and do likewise. And behold, when I come to the outside of the camp, it shall be that, as I do, so shall ye do. When I blow with the trumpet, I and all that are with me, then blow ye the trumpets also on every side of all the camp, and say, The sword of the Lord and of Gideon. So Gideon and the 100 men that were with him came unto the outside of the camp in the beginning of the middle watch, and they had but newly set the watch, and they blew the trumpets and brake the pitchers that were in their hands. And the 3 companies blew the trumpets and brake the pitchers, and held the lamps in their left hands, and the trumpets in their right hands, to blow withal. And they cried, The sword of the Lord and of Gideon. And they stood every man in his place round about the camp. And all the host ran and cried and fled. And the 300 blew the trumpets, and the Lord set every man's sword against his fellow, even throughout all the host. And the host fled to Bethshittah in Zerethath, and to the border of Abel Meholah unto Tebath. And the men of Israel gathered themselves together out of Naphtali, and out of Asher, and out of all Manasseh, and pursued after the Midianites. And Gideon sent messengers throughout all Mount Ephraim, saying, Come down against the Midianites, and take before them the waters unto Bethbarah in Jordan. Then all the men of Ephraim gathered themselves together, and took the waters unto Bethbarah in Jordan. And they took 2 princes of the Midianites, Oreb and Zeb. And they slew Oreb upon the rock Oreb, and Zeb they slew at the winepress of Zeb, and pursued Midian, and brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon on the other side Jordan. I wanted to give a little bit of background on how we get to this point in Judges chapter 7, where Israel is cutting off the heads of 2 princes by the end of this chapter. So, the background of Israel, they've been enslaved for 400 years in Egypt. They have been foreigners in every place that they've gone to from the point of Egypt. So they don't have a cultural identity, and they don't really have a way of doing things, everything that a group of established people have. They don't have their own kingdom. Um, so they don't have very solid identity. And that's really important because when people don't have a solid identity, if they get into a place where they're with neighboring people who have a solid identity, they tend to be influenced. So God instructs Israel multiple times, when you get into the land of Canaan, destroy their way of life, destroy their images, destroy the images. Of course, they didn't do that completely for whatever reason. Some of them could not, some of them did not. So now what happens is, after Joshua dies, Israel is influenced by the Canaanites. And one thing we have to understand is Canaan, the people in Canaan, they have a solidified identity. They are natives to this land. They have solidified religious systems. They have solidified everything that a society would need. And so after Israel has been enslaved for 400 years, they have wandered in the wilderness and they have to sort of rely on these leaders. Well, they don't have to, but they do. They end up relying on these leaders and not developing their own relationship with God, but relying on leaders to be this middleman between them and God. So when the leaders die or the leaders go away for too long, they don't have their own footing, their own relationship with God. So um, now that they're here in Canaan, this is a new generation of Israel. Their leaders have died out, and now they're easily influenced. And because they keep choosing these Canaanite gods, they keep falling back into slavery. Because with that choice means that they're going to be enslaved. They won't choose God. But when they do cry out to God, God does rescue them. And so when we get to Judges chapter 6, Israel is severely impoverished and they're enslaved and oppressed because they did not choose God yet again. And now they are being oppressed by the Midianites. In chapter 6, God tells Gideon to tear down the Baal and Asherah altars that his father has on his land, territory, house. Not quite sure how their housing enclosures are, but Israel is being oppressed so badly that they have to oppress these gods now. Now they don't have a choice because they're impoverished. And so when you're going to live, when you're a foreigner, you're living in someone else's territory, then you have to honor what they honor, especially if you don't choose God. So now you got to choose what they choose, their way of life, their God. So now their gods are in his home. And God tells Gideon, tear these Canaanite gods down. And not only that, use their remnants to fuel a burnt offering to me. So God tells Gideon to do this in chapter 6. So Gideon does it, and he's terrified to do it. He brings men to do it with him and does it at night. When the Canaanites find out what was done, they are highly offended. And they tell Gideon's father that they're going to kill him. And Gideon's father, instead of backing down, he says, you know what? Tell your God Baal to deal with my son if you're so offended. And he gives him the name Jerubbaal. That's why we see here the Jerubbaal, that is Gideon. Jerubbaal means let God contend with this man. So that's what Gideon's father calls him. So that's why the Bible is referring to him as that. This is what happened in chapter 6. As a response to Gideon's father, his urging to use critical thinking skills, they get upset, and in verse 33, they gather together, the Midianites, Amalekites, and children of the east. Then we get to verse 34. Gideon blows a horn, which is like a symbol of a smoke signal, whatever. But he blows a horn, and the inhabitants of his city, Ebezer, the tribes of Manasseh, Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, they gather to support Gideon. So now this is about to be an issue because Canaanites were disrespected in their own home by these foreigners who are impoverished, they're enslaved. How dare you offend the hand that feeds you in their home? So this isn't looking good so far. Now we get to chapter 7. Jerubbaal, who is Gideon, that's why it says that is Gideon, him and the people with him, verse 30 in chapter 6 verse 34, all those Israelites that came together on his behalf, they woke up early. In verse 1, Judges 7, they changed locations so that Midian was on their north side. In verse 2, God tells Gideon, you have too many people, so this you need to get rid of some of them, because if you don't, they might think that their own population and their own might was enough to give them the victory over these Canaanites. So we can't have that. You need to send some people home. So in verse 3, God tells Gideon to send away the fearful. 22,000 people left, leaving 10,000 remaining. Verse 4, God tells Gideon, there's still too many people. Take them down to the water. The men who scoop the water in their hand and bring it up to their face, those are the men that you should take with you. And the men who just bend down and just put their face in it, the men that put their face in the water without discernment, those men send them home. The men who put their face in the water, okay? So Gideon ends up with a group of 300 men. Verses 9 through 11, God tells Gideon that night to go with his men to the enemy camp and to take his servant Purah if he is fearful. Gideon does bring his servant Purah with him, and God tells him, listen to what the enemy says. Verse 12, the Bible is just letting us know that there were so many of them, they were without number. There were a multitude, many more than 300. But in verse 13, Gideon begins to eavesdrop on the enemy camp, and there's two men talking. One of these men start talking about a dream that he had, that a barley bread cake tumbled onto the camp of Midian and destroyed it, turned it upside down. The other man that was listening to the first man tell his dream responds, well, yeah, no one is like Gideon, and God is going to deliver Midian into his hand. So these are the enemy talking that Gideon is overhearing, and the man that heard the dream is telling the other man, well, yeah, Gideon is about to be successful. So verse 15, Gideon heard it. He returned to the Israelite camp. It did strengthen him and give him the confidence to develop a strategy to divide the company that he had, the 300 men, into thirds. He gave them trumpets, pitchers, and lamps, and he instructed them to surround the enemy. And when you surround them, blow your trumpets, yell for the Lord and for Gideon, and then break your pitchers. All this racket. In verse 20, 21, they actually cried out, a sword for the Lord and for Gideon. That's what they cried. That's what they actually cried out. Verse 21, the enemy that were they had so many that they couldn't even be counted or numbered. These people were so terrified. They ran, cried, fled. Israel pursued these men. The 300, they pursued this large multitude of people. Gideon sent messengers to Ephraim, the other Israelite tribe, and told them, meet this enemy at two bodies of water, Beth Barah and Jordan. Ephraim did this, and brought the heads of two of those princes, Oreb and Zeb, back to Gideon. So that is all I have for Judges chapter 7. Thank you so much for clicking on the video. I love you. Have a wonderful day.